Welcome to the Writer Reads Chronicles of a Dark God, Book 2, Dark God's Rise, Chapter 40, The Old One's Power. As Alessia's voice joined Raomar's in a soft chant of healing, the portals to the mountainside swung closed. The soft boom they made as they cut off the outside sunshine made the group jump, and the knights drew their blades, whispering commands for light as they did so. Soon the room was bathed in a rainbowed glow, one that was quickly augmented by carefully held spheres of lightning from the wizards. As Raomar carefully guided Brianda to her feet, his attention was drawn to a roughly whispered disagreement. Looking over, he saw Saren and Magrilor staring at each other. The elf lord's scowl deepened as the wizard continued. "Could have killed us all," he remonstrated. "Didn't matter," Magrilor rasped back. "We were all chosen because we had a part to play, and the Northlander was right about the crystal." He paused, pressing a hand to his chest as he coughed. Saren remained silent until Magrilor had finished, then listened as the elf lord continued. "None of our magics could touch it," he said. "All we could do was hope the magic of our blades and the strength of our arms was going to be enough." He paused and coughed again, more gently this time. When he went on, his voice was softer. "Maybe this is the only part I will have, but the half-elf's role is not yet finished, and we're going to need her skills before the journey's done." Saren sighed and caught Raomar's eye, nodding in silent agreement. They both knew Magrilor had a point, just as they knew Grunwald's plan could have killed them all. "At least warn us the next time you choose to follow a barbarian's plan to defeat magic," the wizard grumbled. He flinched as Grunwald's hand descended to rest heavily on his shoulder. "It worked, didn't it?" Raomar grunted with disgust. "It nearly killed you all," he pointed out. Grunwald shrugged. "Doesn't matter," he replied, then gestured at the citadel around them. "We need to go. We haven't found where the Old One is kept." "I'll take you." Brianda's soft voice drew their attention. She stepped from the shadows at the far end of the courtyard, although Raomar couldn't recall when she'd slipped from his side. Such inobservance could be the death of us, he chided himself. Brianda came to stand before him. "The courtyard leads into a set of rooms that curve around a large garden beyond." She paused. "That is where I expect we'll find the Old One's prison." "Garden?" The female forester moved closer, the others moving in a tight-woven knot behind her. "Then our part is not yet over," another of them noted, and all four looked pleased at the prospect. "I haven't explored all the rooms," Brianda hastened to interrupt. "Only the quickest path to the balcony overlooking the grounds." The female forester acknowledged her with a sharp nod. "Then we'll follow your path and scout out what lies beyond the balcony's boundary," she stated. "The Old One's prison cannot be far." "No." Raomar's soft-voiced denial stopped them as they prepared to move away. He continued as they turned back. "We'll all go, because Lord Darkenoak is right. We have all been chosen, and that means we might all have a part to play at the end." Hearing his words, the rest of the company gathered closer. Raomar gestured to Brianda. "If you and the scouts will lead us, perhaps we can discover what awaits us." Even as he spoke, an ominous presence descended. Dark laughter whispered through the deserted buildings and the open courtyard, and a sinister voice mocked them. "Step a little closer," said the spider to the fly, while Shira snickered, letting the sound echo before going on. "Come to me, my tender ones. Lend to me the power of your fear, and prepare to surrender the sweet flesh of your souls." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Come," he repeated. "Step a little closer so I do not need to feed on you from a distance." "Do not listen!" a woman roared, and Raomar startled. He had never heard a lady speak with such power before. Oblivious to his admiration, the woman kept on. "Close your ears and guard your hearts," she ordered, as Raomar looked to see who she was. A female priestess of Karasi had given the command. She continued in stentorian tones, exhorting the knights to draw your weapons and look to your weaker brothers. And she didn't stop there. She turned to the mages next. Husband your magics, protect the warriors, but use your power with care, lest the old one twist them against you. Protect the warriors, but use your power with care, lest the old one twist it against you. Her voice rolled on, her litany becoming a chant until Raoma felt the power flooding her words flow through the company. As she spoke, she gestured for Brianda and the scouts to lead the way, and Raoma nodded for them to obey. They made their way through the corridors to the balcony overlooking the garden, and had reached the garden's edge before her chanting softened and stopped. One of the knights leaned toward her. Our thanks, my lady, he said. She nodded, but didn't reply, her voice already occupied with forming another spell. This time, Raoma noticed, another of the priests joined her. It comforted him to think there might be more than one deity lending their power to the spell, whatever it was. A wizard raised his voice, surprising him by adding arcane magic to the chant. Priestly magic met and mingled with the summoned arcane, and Raoma paused, sensing the magic around him and finding, yes, elemental power wound its way through the chant, strengthening the spell as it formed. He frowned. Where had that come from? He stilled, letting his mage sense guide him, and was startled to discover the elemental source was the wizard himself. Another wizard began to mutter a second spell, and Raoma felt still more magic gather around them. He kept walking, starting through the garden, reserving the remnants of his power in case it should be needed closer to their goal. They passed through the garden without needing to draw steel, although the knights shifted restlessly, their gazes straying from one side to the other, blades drawn to face the denizens of that surprisingly green space. For some reason, those denizens didn't try to attack. Roma studied them as he passed. They reminded him of a guard of honor, and he almost relaxed. The creatures surrounding them were not the twisted monsters that served the old one. These were pure elementals, true creatures of the elements and not twisted by the old one's touch. Moving between them, Roma got the impression they had gathered to watch his people pass. The garden around them was wild and overgrown, and the single priest of Conic that accompanied them strayed to the edge of the group as though drawn to tend it, while Shira's laughter rippled like velvet around them, and the priest took a hasty step back behind the knights. Roma responded, sending magic over the group to strengthen the spells defending their minds. Beside him, Alessia's voice mingled with those of the other mages to raise a second wall of protection about them, and Roma relaxed a little as he felt it snap into place. The further they ventured from the balcony, the more the garden's extent grew clear. It was made up of sections, each full of elemental guardians, and clearly meant to be a circle of defense within the citadel itself. Certainly its inhabitants were able to warn against intruders. Closer to the garden's center, and under the watchful eyes of its guardians, they found another defensive structure. This one rose before them as the garden ended in a broad gravel path. The path ran around several stone arches, and from within those came the ruby glow of Wolshira's prison. As the company approached, arcane symbols gleamed gold at the top of each column and center of each arch. The two colors, ruby and gold, mingled to form a shifting pattern of blood red and pumpkin orange light. Pure reds and golds existed within that swirling mass, but the colors signified caution and danger as well as magic and blood. Roma called for a halt far enough away from the gleaming symbols so as not to trigger them. This was as far as they could go, even as scry projections. He felt it in the tingle of the air about him and in the knowledge Staravan planted in his heart. Beyond the arches, a pit-like moat circled the gem, and Connick's priest stumbled back. Pure death, he murmured. Pure decay. I did not know such elementals existed. Roma glanced sharply at him, making a note to speak with the man later. Shifting his gaze to take in the rest of the company, he realized he was going to have to speak to all of them, and they to each other, because each was seeing the old one's prison from a different angle, and each was noticing different aspects that the others missed. This business of elementals of death and decay, for example. He'd never have thought of that. He pivoted slowly, scanning the garden and its inhabitants before returning his attention to the gleaming ruby prison visible beyond the arches. With no means of affecting it in the real, they had nothing more to do. Our business here is finished, he declared, and snapped his fingers to signal an end to the projection. The gesture should have seen them return to their bodies. It should have seen the citadel fade from around them. It didn't. Römer blinked and then remembered what the elemental had said, that the gods couldn't enter the citadel save in physical form. And if the gods cannot enter save in person, he realized, then we'll need to leave before we can end the spell. We need to return to the mountain before we can end the projection, he announced, and the knights tightened their perimeter, ensuring the priests and mages were at their center. Römer felt a little of his tension ease. At least the knights were aware they were entering the most dangerous part of their mission. He could sense the magic weakening around them, as though the scrying spell was waning. Not surprising, he thought, taking a step back to signal it was time to leave the garden. He couldn't recall when a projected scry had lasted this long, or been shared by so many. If it were to lose power while they were still inside the citadel, he shuddered. The repercussions would be bad enough if the spell lost power while they were on the mountain and could be retrieved. But here. Move, he ordered, when some turned too slowly for his liking, before the spell loses its power. Around him the wizards groaned. Their protest mingled with those of the priests. Linked as he was to the group, Römer didn't chide them. Even the warriors were growing weak. Hurry, he urged. This time they followed him, backing away from the gem as a single unit. The gem gleamed, the crack in its surface lending the sight a sense of urgency beyond their need to escape. It would need to be repaired or replaced, and not one of them was willing to turn their back on either it or the whirling, shifting colors of the powers surrounding it. The creatures of the gardens remained, watching over them as they retraced their steps to the citadel. It was their presence that enabled the group to turn to face the citadel proper as soon as Walshira's gem was lost to sight. That didn't stop them casting nervous looks over their shoulders as they picked up their pace, but it helped. They missed the creature's presence when they reached the balcony and began to move through the rooms and corridors beyond it. Despite their fears, it wasn't until they reached the open forecourt at the citadel's entrance that Walshira attacked. He struck while most of them were still on the steps leading into the courtyard, dropping nets of silver light from the ceiling. One of the exhausted wizards caught the flash as they appeared and snapped his hands toward them. His voice rang with a single word that sent echoes shouting back at them from the walls. Two of the descending nets shredded in a blinding flare of sparks, and the wizard collapsed, the spell having taken its toll. More nets dropped, moving with startling accuracy toward knights guarding the edge of the group. Römer felt Alessia stir within the protective circle of his arm, and did not try to stop her when she pulled away from him. He heard her draw a deep breath, then release it in a stream of words that grew into a storm of flashing golden blades. She sent the first storm toward the lowest of the nets, then pivoted toward the second, her voice neither faltering nor slowing. Walshira's voice rang around them, but not in a language any understood. Several priests answered it with chants of their own, but Römer knew it wasn't going to be enough. He grasped the weapon at his belt, shaking it free of the leather strap that held it and flinching as Grunwald gripped his shoulder. As he turned to see who it was, another net disappeared in a shower of silver shards as Alessia's spell tore through it. The last net landed on target, wrapping itself around one of the knights. The man shrieked as it touched him, then slashed across it with a blade that glowed red hot. Alessia's storm reached him, slipping through the silver strands and tearing them without touching the man beneath. The knight dropped, and one of the others grabbed him, dragging him into the circle's center, but careful not to touch the red blade he clutched to his chest. The weapon spat defiance and outrage to the world around it, encasing its charge in a halo of scarlet until one of the priests reproved it. Be still, she ordered. Your master is safe beside us. The blade crackled something in reply, but grew silent, its light dimming to a sullen glow. The priestess shifted to face the outside threat. Let me go, Rhaoma protested, trying to twist free of Grumwell's hand, but the Northman's grip was unrelenting. Your magic is gone, he pointed out, and you still have work to do. I would be betraying more than yourself if I let you face the old one unprepared. Murmurs of agreement rose from those around him, and his blade was pried gently from his fingers as other hands drew him further into the circle. Alessia, on the other hand, was under no such restraint. With the flicker of wild magic wreathing her from crown to toe, no one dared touch her. As Rhaoma was drawn away from the circle's edge, she unleashed a second wave of defence. Walshira's laughter reached their ears, and Alessia's voice rose clear and clean against it. As the chants of her fellow wizards and the priests grew weaker, she strengthened her tones in a spell to protect them. Rhaoma watched her and felt her magic defy the draining effects of the old one's laughter. With nothing he could do save monitor the group, he looked around for his companions. Everyone appeared to be present and accounted for, save one. Brianda was nowhere to be seen, and then he noticed Sindra and Saren were also missing. Roma felt Grunwald tighten his grip on his shoulder and narrowed his eyes. When he looked over the group again and still did not see Brianda, he shifted his attention beyond it. Behind him, the sound of running footsteps drew his attention, and he spun, wrenching free of Grunwald's grasp. Wait! He cried, seeing Brianda and the two mages racing toward the doors, the elven knight Magrilor running in their wake. They didn't listen, and he pushed toward them as Brianda reached for the lock. Helpless to prevent whatever was to follow, Rhaoma headed in their direction. Perhaps there was some small way he could aid them. Perhaps. Alessia's voice rose and fell, and he saw the wizardess reversing toward them. He sensed, too, that she drew the old one's attention and held it as she positioned herself to escape. Grunwald, he murmured, indicating the wizardess with a flicker of fingers designed to keep his request a secret from the malevolent power around them. I have her, the barbarian assured him, and Rhaoma returned his attention to Brianda. The rogue had already started working the lock, seemingly oblivious to the threads of magic winding themselves out of it and over her hands. No, not oblivious, he amended, working in spite of it. His heart clenched with fear for her, and he urged the others toward the door. If there was to be a sacrifice, he was determined that it not be in vain. And if they survive, he thought, we'll discuss it. With a vengeance, he added, seeing the door pop open, swinging wide so fast Brianda was carried with it. He watched as she was swept toward the wall and shouted in dismay, shocked when the elven knight leapt forward and grabbed Brianda's arm. The door took him off his feet, and he too was swept toward the wall. Just when Rhaoma thought they were both lost, Alessia's voice thundered around them in denial. Walshira screamed in frustration, only to be driven back by another of the wizardess's banshee cries. The darkness lifted from around them, but Alessia's voice continued. Rhaoma heard the change in inflection and tone, even as Saren's voice sharpened with desperation. And Sindra, he frowned. He was sure the girl had done something, but he didn't know what. More mind magic? He wondered. Alessia's voice continued, her spell changing, pleading, flowing into the door's magics and stilling them so that, instead of crushing Brianda and the knight into the wall, it merely pinned them against it. As Rhaoma stared in relief, Magrilor dragged himself free, then gently extracted Brianda. Go, he ordered hoarsely, indicating the mountainside beyond, and hoping none of Walshira's twisted creations waited. Go! And the knights obeyed, shepherding the wizards and priests through and providing a protective guard around them. Alessia's voice grew softer, her chant fading. It was lost in a rustle of cloth and Grummel's soft grunt of effort as he caught her and jogged back to the group. Joined by Magrilor and the two mages, Brahma ushered them onto the mountain, where the royal of unsettled ground warned of waiting weirds. As soon as he was sure they were all out, Brahma snapped his fingers, and the mountain faded, taking the emerging weirds with it. They were back in the chapel of all gods when their weakness overwhelmed them.